Tonight we're in Gillingham in Kent, and welcome to Question Time. Welcome to you at home, to our audience here, of course, who are here to ask the questions, our panel here to answer, and no, they don't get told in advance what the questions are. Tonight our panel, Conservative Skills and Enterprise Minister Matthew Hancock, the former Culture Secretary Tessa Jowell, hot tip to be Labour's candidate for Mayor of London, the Respect Party MP George Galloway, who could possibly run against her for that job, the economist and author Alison Wolfe, and the historian and broadcaster David Starkey. Good, thank you very much. We'll take our first question from Lisa Gibson, please. Lisa Gibson.
In the wake of 2 Coronation Street actors being cleared of sex abuse charges, should the accused be given anonymity in future rape cases? This
is William Roach, of course, who was cleared by a jury today, and Michael Lavelle cleared earlier on a charge. George Galloway, the coalition agreement between Labour and between Conservatives and Liberal Democrat did have a plan.
Same thing.
Did have a proposal that the anonymity should be given to the person charged. What's your view?
Well, it's a tricky one because when accusations are made and the accused is named, sometimes people come forward with evidence and sometimes with further allegations of other crimes. And it would obviously mitigate against that if the accused was granted anonymity. But in the light of what happened today, this vastly expensive, potentially devastating, disastrous set of false accusations against an innocent man cleared by the court. Indeed, some of the charges were dropped well into the case before even reaching the jury. I think that this matter will return to the agenda in a very big way. The accusers are, of course, granted anonymity, absolutely correctly, and I think the time may be coming for the accused similarly to be granted anonymity.
And when you say the time may be coming, you mean because there is an increase in the number of cases that are being put before the courts?
Well, there appear to be, in these high-profile cases, people in this post-Savile era who are the victims of opportunistic accusation. And that seems to me to be invidious, unjust to them. I have no reason to second-guess the jury today, which was apparently absolutely unequivocal. But Bill Roach has spent many, many months under the cloud of suspicion, entirely unjustifiably, as it has turned out. And that can't be right.
Tessa Jowell.
What concerns me about rape generally is that it is a very heavily underreported crime. And I wouldn't want to see any step taken that reduced the likelihood of women coming forward, being helped to come forward, in some cases many years later, notwithstanding the case today. I don't think that this case, for all its celebrity and everything and the suffering of William Roche and his family, is a reason to take what is a very major step by allowing anonymity for those charged with rape. I think the major priority is to ensure that women who do suffer rape come forward, are supported to come forward, and that the police there is an insistence that the police take accusations of rape more seriously.
But why is that affected by anonymity?
They do.
Why is it affected by anonymity being granted to the accused?
Well, because I think that, I think that, in many cases women are, they're afraid, they're not confident about the protection of their own anonymity. And I think that if you look at this in the round, the priority for us as a society is the protection of women who are subject to rape, and putting absolutely no obstacle in the way of their coming forward and being supported to come forward and bring cases of rape where they have suffered this terrible sexual violence.
OK, Alison Wolfe.
I completely agree with George Galloway. I think that the time has come, actually I think the time was a long time ago, for people who are accused of rape to be granted anonymity until the end of the trial. Clearly, if they're then found guilty, their name comes forward. But I cannot see why putting people through this helps in any way to encourage women to come forward with accusations. It seems to me that there is actually a huge number of unjust accusations being made against people in our society. Most of them don't hit the headlines in this way. It's a living nightmare for many teachers, and I think that it is perfectly possible to have a fair trial with the accused remaining anonymous, and I cannot see how we can possibly justify the number of innocent people who are being put through this. And of course, as many of them will say, once you've been accused, there is this muttering, you know, no smoke without fire, mud sticks, all of these things are perfectly true. And
what about the Stuart Hall case? You remember he pleaded, he said these were all lies and tissue of lies. His name came out, and then a whole lot of other people came up and accused him. And then he pleaded guilty.
But that's also like saying you should hang people because there will be people who won't commit murder because they're terrified of being hanged. I think our primary duty is to protect the innocent in our society and make sure that they get a fair trial.
You say, Luke. Tiger.
I think, given the way the case ended, there was a clear lack of concrete evidence. I think Mr Galloway touched on that point there. But I think these allegations have potentially damaged women coming forward who are genuinely got these gripes, because, you know, the immediate thing of, oh, she's making it up, or these sort of things, and the media intrusion into not only the accused but also the potential victim, is damaging to the real victims. It's been horrible for Mr Roach, but what about the women out there who are scared to come forward because of this?
David Starkey.
I think there are 2 points that I'd like to make. The first relates directly and specifically to the question, why was that idea of anonymity in the coalition agreement? It was directly because of the intervention of a very old and dear friend of mine, Conrad Russell, the late Earl Russell, who, when he was at your college, dealt as a tutor with exactly the kind of case that we're talking about. That is why it was there. The second issue is, I think we've got ourselves into a hopeless confusion on the whole question of rape. The word rape means violence. That is the Latin root. That is how it has always existed in English. That is how it has always been understood. What we have tried to do is to take that word with all its terrible associations and apply it to a whole series of much more awkward, much more difficult to establish, much more contested and contentious sexual encounters by focusing on this issue of consent, which so often boils down, as it did exactly in this case, to his word against her word. Now, I cannot see that the law is at all good at dealing with this. It really isn't. It works very badly. And I think that it encourages false accusation. It also encourages other things as well on the other side. It's a very, very awkward, difficult law. We're in a state of complete confusion about sexual etiquette, aren't we? Complete confusion about what is right and what is wrong. We're trying to change it. We're trying to use the law to change it. And you, Tessa, said something which I think, frankly, is deeply shocking. You said that our interest as a society is on, bringing forward more victims of rape. I'm sorry, we have one interest in society when the law is applied, and it's called justice. And justice is blind, and justice is even-handed. And this sense of a very large female paw resting on one pan of the scale is bad and it's wrong. And I'm going to use the word, it's immoral.
That's utterly reactionary tosh. Rape does not have to involve violence. No means no. If you proceed, it's rape, whether there's violence involved or not.
Shouting, by the way, doesn't deal with the problem at all effectively.
Well, I'm outraged at what you said.
No, I'm sorry.
So will half the country.
Didn't you say
well,
that you didn't...
good, because it might make them think. Just sort of mouthing these things, you know, no means no. Think of... I'm not heterosexual. I have been in very complex sexual situations. Being gay, I'm actually used in one sense to being what it's like on the other side. I know what's involved. I know the complexities. And this, you know, no means no. No means no. Words.
In a relationship in which sex is the norm, then clearly, I mean, nobody watching this asks their wife verbally, would you like to have sex, dear? Nobody does that in relationships.
Let's go back to the question, which is whether anonymity should be given in future rape cases. And Matthew Hancock, we haven't heard from you, so let's hear from you.
Well, I think that this case has been a high-profile disaster, and it's been a disaster both on its own terms and for the impact on Bill Roach, but also because of how it's made this very debate more difficult. Because the concept of open justice, of everything being done in open and in court, is based on everybody taking the opinion of innocent until proven guilty. And the problem in these cases is precisely because of the concern of people not thinking of the perpetrators or the alleged perpetrators as innocent until proven guilty. And I would rather try to establish the principle of innocent until proven guilty because of the downsides of bringing in anonymity, which undoubtedly and provenly making an accusation, if true, does bring forward other victims.
How do you achieve that? How do you try and change?
Well, I think that we should have... It's about the national culture. It involves how the media respond. Innocent until proven guilty is an extremely important principle on which our whole justice system is built.
All right. Tessa, I'm going to come back to you, but I'll get up to the person over there first. You, sir.
I was talking about what George was saying about asking your partner for intercourse on just a basis. What happens, most girls will complain after a couple of months into there was no spontaneous love, there was no care in a relationship. If you're going to have to ask them every 20 seconds if you want them, where are you showing us a spontaneous, actual real love kind?
All right, well, we're on to the issue about what rape is rather than whether anonymity should be granted. The woman there at the back, yes.
I think there's two issues. Bill Roach was never going to be anonymous. He's too famous. That was never going to have anonymity. So I don't think we should use these high-profile cases to talk about a major change in the rape laws. And as for people being confused, I think that's rubbish, quite frankly. I think a man knows if he's had sex with a woman against her will, and so does she. There's no confusion.
And Lisa Gibson, did you want to come back in on this? You asked the question.
I think that due to the media circus and frenzy that surrounded both the cases, I believe in the premise of innocent until proven guilty. And the fact that they are two famous household actors' names, they should be allowed to be in court and in both cases a trial jury to decide, rather than the press and the media.
OK. And Tessa Giles, do you want to come back? Because David Starkey rather laid into you.
Well, not that I noticed. I mean, my test for this is, does any change in the law make it less likely that some of the young women that I represent and, you know, I know turn up at the local hospital, they go to the police, or they languish in school because something horrific has happened to them? Does it make it less likely that they are going to come forward, that the perpetrator is going to be charged and they're going to be given the help that they need? And I think that celebrity is a very bad moment at which to undertake a fundamental change in the law. And I think that the lady who made that point, perhaps rather better than I have, is the view that certainly represents...
Why does anonymity, if anonymity was given, just let's complete this, if anonymity was granted to people accused of rape, why would it make people less likely to come forward and accuse them of rape?
I think that the absence of anonymity sets a higher threshold. I think that's the first thing. And I think that in this
threshold
case...
for what?
Well, a higher threshold for somebody to be charged. And I think also, you see, the role of the CP...
Doesn't evidence
just
do
a
that?
The
second.
lack of anonymity also makes it very tempting to bring false charges when what you want to do is to harm somebody and hurt somebody.
No, but the
and you
point...
don't care if they're later acquitted, because they will, in the meantime, have had terrible damage done to them.
All right. I think we'll have to...
There are thousands and thousands of young women and older women in this country who have suffered forms of sexual violence and never had the confidence or the ability to come
What's this to the
forward.
point?
This to do with
It
the
has no
anonymity?
relationship to the issue of anonymity.
Right, I'm going to hand the argument over to you at home, because you can join in this debate, of course, by text or Twitter. Our hashtag, remember, BBCQT. Follow us at BBC Question Time. Text comments to 83981. The red button will tell you what others are saying. And we'll move on to another question. This one from Adam Collins, please.
How can state schools be the same as private schools with half the funding and double the pupils?
How can state schools be the same as private schools with half the funding and double the pupils? It was Michael Gove who said you should be able to walk into a school and not be able to tell whether it was private or state. David Starkey.
Well, once upon a time, the sort of school that I went to, which was a local grammar school, was in many ways utterly indistinguishable from a middle-ranked public school. I had the sort of education that boys, say at Sedbergh up the road or Heversham down the road had. I had the same kind of extracurricular activities. I had the same sort of enthusiasm, occasionally wild eccentricity of staff. I had the same range of subjects. My school made absolutely no difference one way or another to my achievement or to how I was treated when I got to Oxbridge. The thing that has made this terrible divide in our education is the willful destruction of excellence in the state sector. That is what comprehensivisation did. It was done willfully. Some of the motives were good, many of them were absolutely foul. We willfully destroyed our best schools in the public sector, and we've been running behindhand ever since. That is what happened.
All right. George Galloway.
Well, if our state schools had the money, had the resources, had the playing fields that the private schools have, our state school playing fields are almost all now sold off by this government, which knows the price of everything and the value of nothing, then they would be, many of them would be the equal of private schools that we perversely call public schools in our language. I speak all the time at the very best of these private schools, where the cost to the parents is, in the case of Harrow, £32,000 a year, 35,000 I think now at Eton, and you can see that the parents are getting what they are paying for. They're not paying it for nothing. They have wonderful schools, wonderful teachers, wonderful facilities. And then I go back to Bradford with the third worst schools in the entire country, and I can see that we're not getting what we pay for. We are being starved of the resources and of the creativity from the centre, from the state, that would rescue these schools and rescue these children, who are, of course, the vast majority. So I'm very candid about this, although they might cancel my next invitation to Eton or Harrow. We should abolish public schools, starting with abolishing their charitable status. It's unbelievable that Eton is a charity, and if you give money to it, you get it deducted from your tax and charitable status. Start with abolishing.
You want to destroy our best schools all over again.
No, I want
the
to
same
ensure
idiot cycle.
every child has the same right.
Ever learn.
Every child has the
These
same
were the
right.
mantra that were used.
Look,
you people never learn.
Well,
you're in a cycle of destruction.
What do you mean, you
all
people?
you can think
What do you mean,
is
you
destroying. You people like you.
My background.
What the word "you people" means. People like you. People who are full of sound and fury. You quoted
I'm
Shakespeare.
very furious.
Have sound and fury signifying nothing.
I'm absolutely furious because the children in my constituency are amongst the worst schools, amongst the worst schools in the country. And that means when they leave school, their life chances, unlike you, will not reach these Elysian fields of pop history and academia that you have reached. And I'm absolutely furious about it. And it's my job to sound off about it. And I'll tell you something for nothing. Every child has the same right to a good education.
Of course.
Unconnected to how much money their parents have got.
Okay. Alison, hold on a second. The woman there, you in the green, yes.
The thing is that you're talking about getting rid of all the public school, the private school sector. So where do all those children go? They go into the state school sector, and then the classroom sizes go from 30 to 60. That's not going to improve the situation.
All right, Alison Wolfe, do you want to pick up that point?
I'm actually becoming something of an expert on this particular question because my university my university is setting up a state school. We're setting up a specialist mathematics school for 16 to 19-year-olds, which will be funded as a state school. And, of course, the answer is that at one level you cannot do it with the same amount of money as other state schools. Of course, if you're a private school, you have more money to play with. And it seems to me that private schools are caught in an amenities arms race. You know, one of them has one covered swimming pool, so the next one has to have two covered swimming pools. But, you know, actually that isn't what schools are about, not ultimately. And can you run a really good school in the sense of it being a school of enormous academic quality on the level of funding that the modern state gives you? We believe you can. We believe that we can create a school which is just as good academically and in terms of encouraging the creativity and excitement that the best schools do with the sort of funding that we can get with schools.
So what's gone wrong in Bradford?
I think a lot of things have probably gone wrong in Bradford, but I suspect that one of the major things that has happened in Bradford is that very few good teachers have stayed in Bradford. And one of the things that I do believe that both actually the previous Labour government, which started academies, and this government, which has encouraged academies and free schools, has done, is actually to make it much easier to release creativity and enthusiasm and energy from teachers. Because actually you get a good school when you have a group of staff who give themselves day and night to it because they're excited about it, because it's their school and they can do something wonderful with it.
But on the present funding, that's the point.
Yes, on
David Starkey pointed out
the present funding, it will not be eaten, but can you produce a really good school on the current funding? Yes, you can.
You, sir, over there in the check shirt.
Yeah, I think it's a bit unfair to automatically assume because it's a state school, it's not a good school. There are lots of good schools. I'm a teacher myself, and there are lots of very good teachers in the school that I teach at. And just because you're in a private school doesn't mean the teachers are any better, but it just means they've got a lot of better facilities, they've got smaller class sizes. It makes it a lot easier to be good at teaching. But it doesn't mean that they are better teachers. If you put a state school teacher in that situation...
What's behind your question, though, the original question about what Michael Gove said?
I think you can't... It's very hard to compare when it's not on an even playing field. You can't say to a school where you've got students paying £30,000 a year when they've got facilities out of this world and try and compare it to a school where they might have one football pitch and only have maybe a couple of hard courts. I mean... It's not the same. You can't compare the two.
Sorry, but just one second.
Is his aspiration? I'll bring in. Is his aspiration that you shouldn't be able to tell the right aspiration for a Secretary of State for Education, or is it a fatuous remark?
At the moment, it's factual. You can't compare the two in the sense of funds and facilities. I would love to be able to have the same facilities that private schools have, but if that's the case, then maybe Mr. Gove will give us some more money. He'll make us have less class sizes and maybe give us even more holiday than we get already.
I think I agree with a lot of what you said. You've left out one absolutely central question, and so I'm afraid, as expert Alison. The key thing about public schools is the implied contract between the parent, the teacher, and the pupil. In other words, those pupils are there and they will learn, and there are virtually no disciplinary problems. My experience on Jamie's Dream School...
They do a lot of caning, don't they?
No, which some of you may... Hardly any. It's been abandoned. My experience on Jamie's Dream School makes completely clear to me that the key issue is that of discipline. This is what Michael Wilshire has been on about. This is
and that you mustn't insult the pupils, if I remember rightly.
You mustn't consult the pupils.
No, insult the pupils. I said not consult.
Did you say assault? On the contrary,
you shouldn't insult them, assault them, or.
On the contrary, good teachers insult their pupils the whole of the time in a good, sensible, and joshing relationship.
So telling one he was too fat.
Was absolutely true, because he'd been thoroughly abusive to somebody else.
OK, I don't want to go down that road any further than that.
Well, then you shouldn't go down there in the first place. That's bad chairmanship.
Matthew Hancock.
I agree.
Straying from the subject.
I agree very strongly with the gentleman who just spoke, that it's a vision, obviously not a reality now. And the reason that this is a goal towards which we should march is because it's possible, it's doable to have very high standards in the state sector, even though obviously, cash is much, much tighter. And we know that even with tight cash, you can dramatically improve standards, because it's happened, and it's happened over the last 5 or 10 years. I'd pay tribute to some of the Labour ministers, especially Andrew Adonis, who started this programme, this Academies programme, because some of the schools in the worst areas of London are now some of the best schools in the country, and this is now increasingly happening across the country. But there's one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, which is a core driver of how this happens, and that is expectations. These schools that have really improved set very high expectations for every child to reach their potential, even if they're not naturally gifted, even if they've had a difficult time so far. You set high standards and high expectations, and then you challenge children to get to those expectations. And boy, have we discovered through trial and error of the last decade or so that if you set high expectations for children, more likely than not, they reach them. And I care passionately about doing that in the state sector, and I would love Michael Gove's vision to become a reality, but there is a huge, huge gulf that we've got to get over. But can we move in that direction? Absolutely, yes, we can.
What do you... What's your view of George Galloway's suggestion that, for a start, you might cut the charitable status of places like Eton or Harrow or whatever?
Well, you don't, as a country, cut your nose off to spite your face.
That's what you think it would be?
I think there's two reasons that it'd be a disaster. The first is, as the lady said, you'd end up with more people in the state sector, and we don't have much cash in the state sector, and so it'd be spread more thinly.
We've got lots of cash.
But the other reason,
how we're spending.
No, we don't. We're borrowing £100 billion a year still as a country.
But the second wars,
reason,
cash for nuclear weapons, cash for banks, cash for bankers' bonuses. We've got cash for tax cuts for the richest people in the country. There's lots of cash. But you're giving it away to your pals, your fellow public school boys and girls. That's what you're doing with the cash.
All right. The man up there in the centre, and I'll come to you, Tessa, with the spectacles in the back row, please. You say it. No, yes. You haven't got spectacles on, that's my bad eyesight. You, sir.
Frequently the debate is more dragged to bring the top down rather than bring the lower schools back up to where we want to be. We shouldn't be tearing down the top layer. We should be bringing the lower layer back up to the ground.
And the person over there on the right, in the back row on the right there.
Surely private schools will always want to be better than public schools, so it will always be a tit for tat if public schools...
Great, then they'd all get better.
Tessa Giles.
No, they won't, because you'll spend more money. Public schools, more money will go into public schools. Surely that'll be a waste of money.
Tessa Giles.
You see, I think this question touches on a whole number of issues. First of all, it is absolutely not the case that all public schools, all independent schools are better than state schools. There are fantastic state schools in which brilliant teachers, dedicated teachers, are teaching up and down the country, across London, in my own constituency, and I think that this is, first of all, an argument that we should reject, that state means inferior in every case to private school. I mean, I think the argument tends to be dominated by 4 or 5 very famous, high-achieving, highly selective private schools that tend to dominate the entrance to Oxford and Cambridge. What is it that makes a good school? It's a combination of things. It's excellent leadership by a motivated and brilliant head. It's also dedicated staff. It's engaged parents. But the other thing is, and I think this is a really important thing, is, you know, children go to school to learn so that they're informed, they're competent and so forth. But the diversity of state schools is what is teaching children to be citizens of the modern world. And that's what I think is so important and so incredibly uplifting about a lot of our primary schools and a lot of our secondary schools. Of course, we've got to do better and do more. And the ambition, in a way, never stops, because there are more children from disadvantaged, poor families,
yes,
unmotivated
but what
families
did you make of
in state schools.
What did you make of Michael Gove's comparison of the state and private system as having a Berlin Wall between them, which he wanted to knock down?
Well, you know, I mean, I happen to represent a constituency where there are a large number of independent schools and there are a large number of increasingly successful state schools.
So you think the comparison is wrong?
I think
making a dichotomy of that kind.
But also, I think this assumption that you walk into an independent school and you find excellence, and you walk into a state school and find mediocrity, is deeply insulting and untrue.
All right. You, sir.
There will always be a difference between private schools and state schools. The cultures are different. But I agree from the point of view, I think Michael Gove's point was, he's trying to say that the standards can be, the gap in standards can be closed. I mean, one of the examples he gave was a longer school day, which is what they do in the private schools. Extracurricular activities, help with homework and stuff like that, which would help people from poorer backgrounds, and also discipline. David Starkey mentioned that. It's a huge thing that needs to be migrated from the private to the state school more, where there is a gap.
Thank you. Right, no, we're going to go on. We're going to go on, David. We're going to go on. Joan Morris, a question from Joan Morris, please.
Should workers in essential services be refused the right to strike?
Should workers in essential services be refused the right to strike? Matthew Hancock, thinking, of course, of the current difficulties that brought London to a halt for the 48 hours.
Yes. Well, many of us were delayed on the way down here, and you know, I support the trade union movement, and I work with the trade union movement, for instance, on expanding apprenticeships, and I think that they are badly served by their bosses, because there was not a majority of trade unionists who voted for this action. The majority of workers on the tube didn't vote for this action, and they were driven into it by their bosses. And I think that we do need to look at the way that those votes take place. And we also need to think about whether essential services can be brought to a standstill. For instance, you know, the police can't strike because you wouldn't want a moment when all of the police in the country weren't at work.
So are you in favour of essential services being refused the right to strike?
Well, I think that
I mean, the New York subway, I believe they have no right to strike.
I do think that we need to consider it, but I don't think we should
consider mean exactly?
Well, I think,
have a look.
But I don't think that we should do it off the, you know, in the midst of the of a strike which has been so destructive. Because
Isn't that the right moment to think about?
Because we need to balance, on the one hand, the right to withdraw your labour is an important right, but just as important, and I would say this week, more important, is the ability to keep our country going and the ability for people to be able to get on with their lives. And the strike this week has shown that despite the fact that a majority didn't vote for it, they managed to have a big disruptive impact, which means that doctors haven't been able to get in to treat their patients, that teachers haven't been able to get into schools to teach. And I think that this strike was absolutely wrong, and we need to look at whether we need to change the rules about it.
Do you want the right to strike refused?
personally, I think that members of the London Underground who decide to strike, I think that is an essential service. If you look at horrific situations such as a terrorist attack or 7/7, you look at those supervisors, the number of people in those stations who helped evacuate people who were in those tunnels, who are in those moments, those crucial moments where they were then supported by the emergency services. You can see the focus and the importance of that service, and you can see the importance of it to London as a financial capital. If the real losers at the end of the day are going to be the millions of Londoners who haven't got to work, aren't able to get to work, where the economy then suffers when we've been growing. And to be honest, personally, I find the fact that the RMT officials haven't really met properly with Boris Johnson, or whatever there's a breakdown of communications, is frankly ridiculous.
Okay. George Galloway.
Well, this is what happens when you elect a clown as the Mayor of London. And it's not very funny. And the suffering that has occurred over the last 48 hours is not funny for anybody. And it's not funny for the workers who had to lose 2 days' pay over it. By the way, the workers voted to strike. I wouldn't like anyone to be misled. You support trade unions like the rope supports the hanging man. The truth is that Boris Johnson provoked this strike by issuing a fiat to close every ticket office in London and make hundreds of people redundant without negotiating it with the people who are paid to represent the interests of the staff. You know, it's not rocket science. 5 years, Boris Johnson has not met with the leaders of the RMT. This is contempt, Tory contempt for working people and their organisations. And in the final analysis, working people only have their labour to withdraw. They don't have your money. They don't have the money that the people in the City of London have. They don't have any power except their own labour power and the right legally, democratically to decide to withdraw it for a day or two.
Only 30% of members of the RMT voted for this strike.
You're assuming the others were all against it.
Only 30% of people voted for Boris Johnson.
And the plan is perfectly reasonable, and not to close every ticket office. And in fact, covered.
Why are you saying that? It is to close every single ticket office on the London Underground. You don't even know what your own mayor's doing.
That's just not true. And also, it's well covered by voluntary. People applying for voluntary redundancy. It's a perfectly reasonable plan, and there's no good reasonable argument for bringing London to a halt.
All right, the woman up there.
Well, firstly, I think it's really unfair of you to suggest that people are just striking to prevent people from getting to work. They're striking because they're angry. Yeah. And if politicians are just going to say they're only going to consider helping them in the future, then it's no wonder that they want to strike to begin with.
OK. And you, sir, in the centre there.
I totally support the right of anyone to take strike action, but the London Underground is one of the most expensive underground systems in Europe.
Thanks to Boris.
Surely this is a way of improving efficiency on the underground system and hopefully reducing fares.
All right, let's come back to the issue of whether it's so important that there should be no right to strike in this and other essential services. David Starkey, what do you think?
I think generally the rule is that there should be no right to strike. Because what is happening in this strike, and indeed has happened in the London Underground over the last 15 or 20 years, is a process of pure extortion. Bill Crow is not an ineffective trade union leader. Bill Crow is a staggeringly... Bob, whatever he is. The large, fat, red man with the pina coladas is an incredibly effective trade union leader. They are paid £52,000
Heaven forbid. How much do you earn? A lot more than that. Indeed. For a less onerous, less responsible job.
Come on. Their jobs could be replaced by a dummy. Most of the trains are designed to run automatically. Come on, these trains are designed and intended to run automatically, as every subway system in the world is increasingly doing. Now, what has happened with London Underground is that it has been mismanaged by both Livingston and by the current mayor. Livingston deliberately encouraged the trade unions. Boris is a hopeless administrator. Ken Livingstone is a malign genius. And London TfL needs shaking up from top to bottom. The reason fares are so scandalously expensive is mismanagement on an unbelievable scale.
But is it a service so essential that the law that applies to the police and the military, that they're not allowed to strike?
If we were any other European country, it would be. Yeah. I was actually astonished to discover that we are the only country in Europe that does not have a coherent body of law defining essential services and defining what you have to do in the event of a strike. It's not about you're never allowed to strike, but it's that if you do go on strike, there is a basic minimum that you are obliged to maintain. And I was absolutely astonished. Every country in Europe except us has a very clear body of law relating to that, and yes, it includes public transport in large cities.
So what would the effect of that be in London?
It would have meant that you had to keep a service going on every single line at a certain level. It wouldn't have meant that you couldn't take any industrial action, but it would have meant that people who really had to get around could. And in terms of withdrawing your labour, I mean, you know, I have friends who have lost large amounts of money because their businesses effectively had no takings over the last 2 days.
Right. Well,
so, you know, this is why these are defined as essential. They're defined as essential because they are essential to allowing other people to carry out their normal life, essential to allowing people to get to doctor's appointments, get to school, get to work, get to businesses. That's what essential means.
Tessa Jowell, let's just define you a little bit here. You may be the person who challenges for the mayoralty of London.
You may know more than I do.
No, I said you may be, and I know many people tip you to be mayor of London. Were you mayor of London? What will you do about this?
Well, first of all, I would not support withdrawing the right to strike from public sector workers. In response to Alison's point, you know, I got the tube, the bus yesterday. It was inconvenient, long delays and all the rest of it, but it was possible to get. It met your standard of a basic service. But, you know, I think that withdrawing the right to strike assumes that public sector workers undertake industrial action in a kind of reckless, unthinking way, and they don't. And this was a strike. Just a second. Okay. David, stop it. This was a strike that was completely preventable. Completely preventable had, first of all, Boris Johnson not broken the promise that he made when he was elected. He promised that no ticket stations, ticket offices would be closed. I actually think that there is a case for, you know, getting people out of ticket offices and out on the platforms. All that could have been negotiated had we not had the farce of Boris Johnson and Bob Crow. The only way they could talk to each other was by phoning LBC and having their discussion mediated by Bob Crow. That is not the way to do it.
OK.
Well, Boris stood on a very clear platform of modernising the tube. And you know why we need to modernise the tube?
He promised to keep the ticket officers.
He stood on a platform of modernising
the tube.
Can
I read the quote out, just so we get round this point? 2010, the Mayor takes this promises to London extremely seriously. Every station that has a ticket office will continue to have one. Statement from City Hall.
The question is, how many people do you put in ticket offices, and are people better on the station platforms, this is the proposal, on the station platforms, helping people when
why did he say this?
Only 3% of the travelling public use the ticket offices.
So why did he go out on a limb only 3 years ago to say every station will have a ticket office?
Because, of course, there will still be places you can go in each station.
You're struggling here, man.
No, why not? No, because I'm very clear. You have people. There will be people available, right, for when people have
difficulties. So this is called the student loans moment, isn't it? Yes.
But the crucial thing about improving the tube is that then we can keep the prices on it down. And you can't keep the travelling public moving and moving at a reasonable cost if you set everything in stone and say that when 97% of people who use the tube don't go through a ticket office, we need to have them and staffed up because Bob Crow says so.
All right, let's just take one more point for the person at the back there.
I completely agree with Tessa there. everyone should have the right to strike. Why? It depends what their job is. Just because they're brave enough to do that job, it doesn't change their right to strike.
Including the police.
And the right,
What do you make of it? Are you then saying the... Come on.
What about the firefighters?
Their right to strike should encourage other
firefighters?
politicians to sort out the situation.
I'm
and wait in
asking you a
24
little
hours till it's all
question.
over.
You've said everybody should have the right to strike. Are you saying the police should have the right to strike?
Well, yeah, and the threat
Well,
of
yeah.
that.
Well,
Yes.
yeah. Is this how we conduct
And the
debates?
threat of that strike should make decisions.
I don't think it's wise to insult our audience, David.
On the
Starkey.
contrary, the audience occasionally needs it. No. It is an honest debate and not somebody who's afraid.
I'll take one more point from the... No, I've had you and... you, sir, in spectacles there, yes. Yeah.
Sorry, I think the most important thing in this is actually being lost. The people involved in the underground, who work for TfL, are being completely forgotten. Unfortunately, you've got two egos completely dominating this argument. The media are spinning it to be a Bob Crow versus Boris Johnson. Now, the thing is, if you take away the people's right to strike, what else have they got? If the unions aren't working, what protection is there for the common man in a dispute that isn't striking?
OK.
Have you heard of employment law? Do you know the huge structure of employment protection that now exists? Strikes in the public sector are mere extortion against you and me. That's all they are, which is why they're paid $52,000 a year.
Well, some of them are. Can I just deal with this? Because it's not true. Some underground workers earn $52,000 a year.
The drivers, who do nothing.
52,000 is a bad month's bonus for a banker in the City of London. Give me a tube driver with hundreds of people at his back. That's a responsible and important job. If the bankers went on strike, we'd all be better off.
All right. Let's go on to another question. This one is from Chris Brewer, please. We've got only 10 minutes or so left. Chris Brewer.
Why are there still so few women in Parliament?
This is an issue that surfaced yesterday in the House of Commons when Labour's front bench seemed to be entirely made up of women and the Tory front bench seemed to have not one single woman on it. And much was made of this. Tessa Jowell, why are there still so few women in Parliament? I think Labour has 34% of its membership is women.
Absolutely. And
Conservatives about
after
16.
the next election, we hope that proportion will increase because my party, the Labour Party, has since 1993, 1994, been impatient to increase the number of women. Why is it important? Because that when you look at Parliament, when you are at the receiving end of the laws that, you know, we were talking about rape earlier, that Parliament passes, you can be confident that they're made by a Parliament that is representative of the country, balance between men and women. And, you know, it doesn't happen, and the Liberal Democrats and the Tories have been very critical of us in doing this. It doesn't happen unless you have a period of positive action. We have all women shortlists, and that's why we have a bigger proportion of women in Parliament than any of the other parties.
These are constituencies where you do not
so.
allow men to stand as potential candidates.
Yeah, exactly.
And how many of them are there?
It's
when Jack Rome is involved.
It's half our winnable seats. So
when Jack Rome is involved.
we will almost in every case, I think in every case, replace women who are standing down with all women shortlists, and half our winnable seats will have.
I love the word
all women
winnable seats. I don't quite know what that means.
Well, it
They're
means
predicting the next election results.
Well,
Matthew Hancock.
We live in great hope and strong campaigning.
Matthew Hancock.
Well, I hope that this can change, and I'm a passionate supporter of having more women in Parliament. And
So what's the why? What's the answer to the why are there still so few?
Well, firstly, there's a question of the passage of time. You know, people tend to be in Parliament for a long time, and the Conservative Party went from, I think it was 17 women to 48 women in the last Parliament when we first introduced positive action to get more women into Parliament. And so it does take time. But there's another reason, I think, as well, which is that in the past, the way Parliament has operated, frankly, has been anti-family. It's been designed on a principle of the sort of, you know, a 19th century principle, and the timings with votes at 10:30 in the evening. And one of the things that I was proud to do when I first came into Parliament was campaign amongst MPs to change the sitting hours so that we start earlier in the day and we finish at 7 o'clock. Now, 7 isn't desperately early, but it does help with those who've got families, and it helps with the work-life balance, so you can then go home. And I think that changing the way that Parliament operates to make it more family-friendly will help.
What about the masculine culture? What about
the
the macho masculine culture we see on display every Prime Minister's questions on a Wednesday?
Well,
what about the way that Prime Ministers on both sides conduct their business, and the paucity of cabinet members who are women? I mean, aren't these the factors just as much as the timetable?
I'm not sure that's true on the cabinet ministers. There's the proportion of Conservative cabinet ministers now who are women, 24%, is the same as under Gordon Brown. I wish it were higher, and I imagine that it will be higher. No, I don't want to predict who will be in the cabinet in future, but I wish it were higher. And I think that taking action will take time, but we've got to get there.
All right, the man up there, is that you, sir? No, to the left, and yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, thank you. I think seeing more women in politics would be wonderful, but I don't think having all women shortlists is the way to go about it. I think it's a deeply patronising gesture. I think women should get into politics on their own merit, and they are more than capable of competing with men. You know, we're not going to see all homosexual shortlists, all Asian shortlists. Okay. Women should get into Parliament, chosen by their constituents on their own merit.
Alison Wood.
I totally agree. I'm deeply against all women shortlists. I mean, of course you can have half and half, male and female, if you have a sort of diktat that they're only allowed to be 50% male, 50% women, female. I don't think that makes it representative. I've never been able to understand why a female who's been to Oxford and then gone straight into politics is any more representative of the country than a male who's been to Oxford and gone straight into politics. So I think that it's an artificial way of doing it. It doesn't encourage really good women to come forward either. As to why there are so few, I think it is partly time and that things will improve. It's partly, curious enough, on the Conservative side, a reluctance by the majority female membership often to select females as candidates. I think that will go. I think it will change. I think it's part of a changing culture. I do think that it will always be difficult to get women who are in their 30s and 40s and have children to be active members of Parliament and do the job properly, because the reality is that it's a very demanding job. It's not just about the male culture. I am full of admiration for people who manage to do it, doubly full of people who do manage to do it with children. But I actually think, curiously enough, that one of the best ways to increase the number of women in Parliament would be for us to actually be less ageist in our selections. That if we were more willing in all three parties, to encourage people in their 50s to come forward and to go into Parliament, rather than it being so much now something which is seen as a full-time job. You start to do it when you're 18 and you carry on doing it. I actually think that would do a huge amount for the male-female balance.
Alison, could we persuade you to stand?
No.
The person there, yes, you said.
Just to reiterate the points that have been made earlier, it should be done on the individual's ability to stand as an MP. It discriminates against men doing women's shortlists.
All right, George
it's the individual.
George Galloway.
Well, I want positive discrimination so we get more working class people in Parliament. You see, Parliament is full. Parliament is full, unfortunately, in all three parties, of public school, young careerists like Matthew. God bless him. I hope he does well. But that's what he is. The Parliament is full of researchers who go from a good school to Oxford University, and you can see them looking at the older members of Parliament walking across the tea room, wondering when they're going to fall over and there might be a by-election and they can get their place. I want to see positive discrimination in favour of better members of Parliament, who don't spend their time filling in their expenses forms, who are not filling their pockets at the public's expense, with tens of thousands of pounds, charging their dinner, charging their scatter cushions, charging to get their moats cleared out. That's the kind of positive
But
discrimination.
why are there still so few women?
Well,
that was the question.
We have had women. Margaret Thatcher was a woman, and it didn't make her any good. And Tessa and her friends told us for years in the Labour Party, if only we could get more women into Parliament, there'd be fewer wars, less aggression, and all of that. There was 101 Blair babes elected in 1997, and all but 3 of them voted for every war that Tony Blair took us into. So I'm not big on this.
David Starkey.
Well, I sort of agree with George. I think we need to ask some very hard questions. Why is it so important that there be an even balance between men and women? Why, do we not have a similar quotient for Asians, homosexuals, left-handed people, or whatever? And so this is, if we demand that Parliament reflects us, that's a question worth asking. I think the other thing is we've got to ask, what is it that women actually bring? And this question, I think, needs answering, and it needs thinking about. Are we talking about simply social justice? Are we actually saying, as George was hinting, that women are supposed to do it differently? My sense in politics is that successful women are at least as brutal and nasty as the successful men, and Margaret Thatcher is an outstanding example. And the final point is, some of our very worst ministers have been women. No, just please let's confront this.
Nobody's stopping you. Just be brief.
We had Estelle Morris, who at least had the merit of realising she couldn't do the job and resigned within a year. It's true, she knew she couldn't do it. And we had Jackie Smith, who, with intensely strong competition, is probably the worst Home Secretary ever, and was, of course, snout in the trough in the largest possible way. So, sorry, women are not a panacea. They don't bring a miracle. They don't do mysterious good. Sorry, can we all start to be adult and think rather than just imagine?
And on that note, I'm afraid we have to stop because our hour is up.
I had one more thing I wanted to say.
Well, be very quick.
Which is, David Cameron has had more people for dinner called Michael than he has women. So why don't we start a campaign nominating women to have dinner with the Prime Minister?
Who are these Michaels? All right. Prizes for the list of Michaels. And
the women.
And the women, yes.
What I was saying about women illustrated, yes.
Our time's up. Next week, Question Time moves to Scunthorpe in Lincolnshire. We have Robert Winston, the scientist, among the panellists there. The week after that, we're going to be in Swindon. So take your choice of Scunthorpe or Swindon. The website gives the address you can apply to, or call us simply on 0330 123 9988. If you've been listening to all this on Radio 5 Live, the argument goes on Question Time Extra Time. But here, my thanks to our panel, to all of you who came to take part in this programme in Gillingham. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
From gay rights and the Winter Olympics to actor Brian Cox talking alcohol. This week follows next here on BBC One.